for the removal or relaxation of existing immigration regulations to allow for the admission of more Asians and other non-whites in order, among other things, to boost competition in local markets and counter the heavy dominance of Australians. Alternative mechanisms for boosting savings and improving access to development finance for aspiring Papua New Guinean entrepreneurs was also suggested. Improved access to credit from formal financial institutions such as commercial banks needed to be addressed, as well as action to promote non-formal arrangements such as savings and loans associations that seem most suited to meeting the needs of Papua New Guineans. The potential for innovative arrangements, including those successfully operating in other Pacific islands, also merited consideration. Such possibilities included a charge on copper exports, as in Fiji's copper cess, and a levy on sale or leasing of lands. Funds raised from such sources could be then made available to Indigenous groups for investing in business and other productive activities. Above all, Ron was empathetic about the crucial need to boost education at all levels, from primary schooling through to university and technical training. As in many other areas of development in the territory, the availability of well-educated and skilled people was a crucial prerequisite for achieving major advances in the business and related economic sectors. In Ron's views, far more resources needed to be channeled into education and training than provided for in the plan, and he was especially critical of Australia for failing to provide adequate aid support. As noted, Ron's criticism of the plan did not go unchallenged. The counter-responses by Heinz Arndt, doyen of Australian economics, and his colleagues Fred Fisk and Rick Shan, all of them at ANU, were most pointed. These economists agreed with Ron that stressing the need for determined action to promote Indigenous ownership and control. But then came the heavy artillery aimed against many of Ron's assertions and prognoses. He was charged with making too many invidious and invalid comparisons, of overstatement on many points, of impugning Australian motives in the territory, of being wrong-headed on many issues, and giving an unbalanced picture of what was achieved and what needed to be attempted. Questions were also asked whether part of his analysis Ron was guilty of racial discrimination and harbouring Marxist attitudes and having bad breath. Of the more substantive points raised by Arndt et al., several of particular interest. First, in advocating maximising Indigenous involvement in the development process, Ron made no attempt to work through the full implications of such a policy. For example, how would it affect economic growth? To what extent would it conflict with the goal of rapid growth? And how was one to judge the most feasible and practical rate of indigenisation? On the latter issue, it was pointed out that too hasty a rate of indigenisation could entail significant economic costs arising, for example, from wastage of resources, mismanagement, and delays in the development of major projects. The end result could well be a significant loss of economic efficiency, slower growth and employment, and falling living standards. In contrast, a policy favouring rapid growth could be beneficial for Papua New Guineans in the sense that if it led to greater inequity in the distribution of income and wealth, it could also create jobs and boost per capita income levels. The essential point, according to et al., is that finding the right policy mix was not straightforward. Ultimately, it was a matter of judgment on the part of policymakers and not easily amenable to the precise technical solutions. In advocating maximum Indigenous development, Ron was predominantly motivated by political rather than economic considerations. A second point of criticism related to protection as a means of fostering Indigenous employment and businesses. In this, Ron had failed again to appreciate the practical consequences of his proposal. Admittedly, there may be isolated instances where protection of one kind or another could be justified on economic or national interest grounds. However, as a general rule, reliance on trade protection and other forms of discrimination is counterproductive. Among other things, it can stifle competition, raise the costs of doing business, open the way for corruption, and ultimately undermine economic efficiency and growth. Again, prospects that hardly seem in the best interest of the territory. Thirdly, on Ron's suggestions regarding the removal of existing discriminatory immigration regulations against Asians and other non-whites, it was pointed out that, in fact, this could disadvantage Papua New Guineans. For example, the presence of a greater number of Asians would in all likelihood mean more intensive competition with which indigenous entrepreneurs would have to contend. It could also mean higher prices for goods and services, while a policy of allowing a greater inflow of non-whites into the territory may well be against the wishes of Papua New Guineans. Finally, on Ron's claim that Australia had been niggardly in provision of aid to the territory, and especially in relation to education, this was countered by Arndt et al. With the argument that although Australian aid may not compare favourably with that of other regional donors, it was generous when judged in the terms of the size of Australia's population. To conclude, in the context of development planning in Papua New Guinea at the time, Ron's critical analysis of the plan was indeed a significant contribution. Admittedly, he may have been wanting in the sense of failing to adequately appreciate the economic consequences of some of his assertions, and perhaps guilty of exaggeration or even wrong on some points, but in forcefully bringing to the forefront many vital issues that needed to be addressed, he deserves much credit. Above all, he highlighted the crucial need to bolster Indigenous participation in the economic life of the territory and to drastically revise existing development approaches. Moreover, he drew attention to the potentially dire consequences, economic, political and social, that could follow should existing policies go unrevised, while calling for more innovative approaches on the part of planners by, for example, drawing on the experience of Pacific Island nations and specialists from other social science disciplines. Ron's attack on the plan represented a powerful challenge which no doubt sprang from his personal conviction and commitment to speaking up for Indigenous groups until such time as they could do so for themselves. Certainly, his message could not be ignored in future attempts to shape development policies and planning approaches, and for that alone, Papua New Guineans surely owe Ron much. That's the end of Te'o's paper. I'll just add a few comments on of my own. It's interesting when you, a couple of things. One, how much foresight Papa Ron had on a number of things, and I'll just share with you one. He was someone, when I was, this is 30 years ago, was already talking about the rise of Asia and how important Asia would be in my lifetime, and encouraged me actually to go to China with the New Zealand Foreign Affairs Department, which I did. And when I went there, I saw, if you look at CNN and you see North Korea, you know, the one with the big parades and terrible poverty, that was China 30 years ago. And so Papa Ron was telling me that this was going to be the powerhouse of the world. And I thought, Papa Ron, you've got this one wrong. It might be a powerhouse maybe in a couple of 100 years, but not anytime soon. And his whole point was the kinds of things that lead to economic success in this current world situation, such as a heavy valuation on education, a heavy value on thrift, of saving, of reinvestment, would overcome the shortfalls that they had in the economy at that time. And goodness me, it's proven to be so true. And I never thought in my lifetime to see, you know, the kind of public buildings we have in Rarotonga built by the People's Republic of China. Tremendous foresight. And so I think you can see that in his views on Papua New Guinea. And I don't think he was wrong. I think the kinds of points that he was raising, that if Papua New Guineans weren't front and centre part of the economic growth of Papua New Guinea, a very different and unfavourable outcome would be the result. So on that basis, I will ask you to have another stretch, and then we'll go into Professor Bridge Lyle's talk in a couple of minutes.